Welcome back to CodingCat.dev, where we give you cats the freshest dose of dev snacks. Here is Alex Patterson and Brittney Postma. This episode brought to you by Storyblok. Build anything and publish everywhere. I won't do my echo today. I think you called me out last time.
I think it's been like the last few times. It'll just...
We'll talk about Storyblok. They're awesome sponsors. First, we'll talk about some web containers, though, with Eric. Eric, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
People may know you from StackBlitz. I believe you're a CEO over there, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah.
So this is the portion of the show where Eric kind of breaks down all about how the heck he got started in web development and then ultimately started StackBlitz. So I gotta hear your story. Like, did you go to college first? How did you break into web development?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I started StackBlitz with a guy named Albert Pye. So Pye and I have actually been best friends since we were kids, actually. So that's actually where kind of the story starts. Is back when we were 12 or 13. Albert and I grew up down the street from each other.
Wow.
In a suburb of Chicago called Naperville. Anyone's ever heard of that?
It's about 3 hours away for us. We've heard of it. Good place.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. It's grown a lot. I mean, there's Naperville's both kind of interesting and also boring. So Albert and I grew up in Naperville, grew up down the street from each other, and this is back in probably like mid 2000s, I want to say. We were very interested in like programming, but back then there was not these online learning sites like Code Academy or kind of these free things to get started and whatnot. It's really not a thing back then. And the only way to do it was really like to buy the O'Reilly books or kind of the equivalent of these things, yeah. Right? And those are expensive. I mean, those are like $100, $200 a pop. Those
crazy.
At least they were back then, and I think they still are. And we were like 12 or 13, so we did not have a couple $100. And with inflation, certainly not back then. So what we ended up doing is we asked our parents on our 12th or 13th birthday or whatever to buy us programming books instead of an Xbox, basically. And so
wow.
Albert and I, I think it was PHP and MySQL. We learned that, and then we just kind of from there, we've been building web applications ever since. And we built a whole bunch of things throughout high school together, and then. After high school, we actually I came straight out to Silicon Valley, actually. And then I convinced Albert to drop out of his first year of college and come out here with me. And we've been building different projects and companies kind of ever since. And so StackBlitz is kind of, and so there's kind of a story of how we actually came to build StackBlitz. I never thought we would, I never thought I'd be building like an IDE or dev environments or anything like that, honestly. We never really worked in dev tooling before this company. Like we were just purely consumers of dev tooling to build applications or whatever. And it was like pretty interesting because this StackBlitz, it really actually solves the problem that Albert and I really first had when we were learning to code, because it's the hardest part is actually getting your dev environment set up. You can't even start learning to code until you do that. And you kind of do these things where with Code Academy, you can learn to program in the language, but once you need to take that and actually apply that to build something real, it's like that then you have to solve the dev environment problem again. And so most people drop off before they even finish going down the path. And so it's kind of cool. We're kind of solving this problem that Albert and I had, we were 12, 13 years old, and we eliminating this hopefully to ever be a problem again, for any people learning to program on this planet. But so how StackBlitz, how we came up with the idea for the thing. This is the last bit, and then I'll, I've been talking a lot. So
no, you're fine.
This is a fun story for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and so Albert and I, one of the company we did before this one, we completely bootstrapped it. It's called Thinkster.io, and we were teaching. It was, if you ever seen Egghead.io or Pluralsight or Lynda, it was that same sort of model where you could come to our site. We had a lot of free content, and so a lot of people were finding us. This is back in 2013, 2014. So right as Angular 2 and React were coming out, and so web development was changing in this new way for the modern era that we're kind of still riding at this point. And So we were like writing different blog posts on there, and we had content that you could pay a subscription to access and that sort of thing. So at the peak of Thinkster, we probably had a couple 100,000 people that were hitting the site every month and learning. And the biggest problem they were running into was, they would be going through our React tutorial and they'd say, "Hey, React says it's out of file watchers on my computer." It's like, that's like not React. Like that has nothing to do with React. Impeding their ability to learn the content. And at the time we were like looking at CodePen and these other fiddle things that were used a lot to teach the kind of Gen 1 of web development. And at that point, none of them could access NPM. They couldn't compile or transpile things. There's no Webpack loaders. And so we were teaching the cutting edge of what you could do in a browser, right? And we had this moment where we just realized, oh God, actually browsers have gotten pretty powerful. It should be possible to actually run your dev tools in a browser, because a lot of these, like Webpack is written in JavaScript, right? It's targeting, Node.js as the JavaScript runtime. But theoretically, it should be possible to run Webpack in a browser tab. And that's kind of where StackBlitz spawned from, because it was just we looked everywhere, no one had done it, and we're like, if you could do this, it'd be amazing. It'd be super fast because it runs entirely on your computer. So it's like a local dev environment, but it just mounts instantly in a browser tab effect.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we ended up taking that concept even further with web containers, where we're actually running Node.js in your browser tab instantly. And so it provides this awesome experience where it's used for just, a huge number of things like prototyping and like documentation and like learning, but also for things that are now even heavier weight. We have a thing called CodeFlow that we released back in October at VConf. And it basically allows you to do your entire development cycle in a browser tab now instantly for like creating and reviewing requests. So that's kind of the in a nutshell, kind of what we've been up to, how we got here, et cetera.
Oh, it's really amazing. I think right around that time Thinkster was acquired. I think it was Joe Eames, right?
Yeah.
I think that's my first kind of dive into StackBlitz, and I think at that point or before then, Angular 2, like the entire documentation was able to start running out of StackBlitz at that point. So that was my first knowledge and kind of foray into StackBlitz, and I found it to be an amazing product because you could just spin up anything, and it was actually at that time, as slow as my computer was, it was faster loading on that side than it was locally. I don't know how, but it was freaking amazing at that point. So it's a really cool story.
Totally, yeah, and that's kind of been for the philosophy of like the technical philosophy, at least, is like, there's been a lot of hype about online IDEs over the past decade and a half, and like they just haven't taken off. And our viewpoint on it is that, typically in just about every way, online IDEs have tended to be worse than your own local environment. They are slower. Typically, you actually have more CPU power on your local machine than whatever you're renting by the minute. Of course, and you're renting this thing by the minute when you actually have hardware in front of you to run it on. And for things like web development, you're constantly hitting the refresh button to see your application. And so if you're having to do a round trip to some cloud VM, that's obviously is not going to have caching, because you don't want caching because it's a development cycle. You're slinging megabytes of uncompressed payloads of your dev server over the wire, and so just kind of in every way, it's worse than your own local machine. And so for us, it's like that's actually the bar that we set, is like we actually don't, at a minimum, we want to be as fast as your local machine to install and boot and et cetera. But we actually aim to be multiples faster. Especially for like booting and installing dependencies, because there's a lot of things you can do that really move the needle. And so, like, generally speaking, like the installs on StackBlitz will run anywhere from 5 to 10 times faster than you could even do on your own local machine.
Yeah, there was something called like Turbo, right?
Yes.
So I was not Turbo like the mono repo, but the other side of it. So that's kind of like a NPM package management tool that loads those. How does that work?
Yeah, so back when we built the first version of StackBlitz, it's out. When we first had the idea for StackBlitz, we no one had done this. There was no prior art whatsoever. So we were like, this seems really compelling, and we kind of got nerd sniped, I guess, by the idea. And so Albert and I have always been suckers for a good challenge too. And so we spent 6 months of our lives kind of building out the prototype of this thing. And one of the first challenges, especially back in 2016, when we kind of started working on that, was one of the biggest challenges is that getting NPM, like being able to do NPM installs in the browser, like browsers are just not at that time. It was very, very limited, like the amount of bandwidth you could really do and the number of requests. And so we ended up applying a lot of the same concepts that, like, at the time Webpack had popularized around, like tree shaking and doing analysis of the actual dependency trees from the files. And so we actually were able to cut down the payload sizes over the wire for Turbo V1. That is, I think it was like, in some cases it was ridiculous. Like we were dropping 99% of your modules, right, during the installs. And at that time it was really, really important to do. And so it was, these days, and so that was also Stackblitz V1 was kind of a limited. It was kind of like we hacked together this like mini NPM plus mini Webpack that could run in a browser, basically. And that for like let's see, that was 2017 is when we launched it, and I think 2021 is when we launched WebContainers. So probably about 2 years into that. Hopefully this is interesting, by the way. But,
this is very interesting.
Yeah. So I'll try and keep it. I'll keep it, short, and so you can poke around.
No, we love the backstory. We'll get to the the meat of it. We'll get to WebContainers when we
because it was actually like it's been a consistent story of, like, again, the kind of the key insight was like browsers have become very powerful. And actually I should mention, kind of at the same time frame, the guys who founded Figma, Dylan in particular, was a buddy of ours, and so he and I had talked a lot back in the early 2010s about how he was kind of putting Photoshop in the browser, and like there's these new things browsers could do that was enabling this to happen for the first time. And so we had spent a good amount of time talking to people that were doing this sort of thing in other types of productivity applications. And so when this came around for Stackblitz, I think that's part of why we were like, oh, whoa, this is actually, there's kind of maybe another ground zero moment here for the first time ever, this sort of thing can be done. And because it's just a whole new world of opportunities if that's actually true. And so the first version of Stackblitz was like baby NPM, baby Webpack that could run. It was super great. It was like basically CodePen plus, right? Which was very needed at that time, because CodePen and these other things, they're amazing. They're super fast, and again they use your browser to do that compute work, but they couldn't do a lot of the things that modern tool chains were needed to do with Webpack and NPM. And so by going and building that out, we ended up having some hundreds of thousands or millions of developers that use that stuff. And they were constantly asking it, okay, hey, can I run this thing in Stackblitz? Can we, run this type of Webpack loader? And it was all, we had to do this stuff by hand. And we kind of got to a point where we were just making lots of things manually run in a browser. And we realized, oh, actually, if we could actually put, punch in a layer below this, and we actually bring in, like, write a mini operating system, a little micro operating system in WebAssembly that was powerful enough to actually mount Node.js on top of that, you could effectively just like run everything in the ecosystem. And so we were digging into it. We're like, okay, well, theoretically, you could potentially write this little micro operating system. It could be like a couple hundred kilobytes, maybe, so it would be like instant to load effectively. And you could probably drop Node down to be, 500K, something like that. So it's like, you're talking about a payload. I mean, you're running, an OS and Node.js, for, maybe around a megabyte,
That's crazy.
And so that's, and so we spent, I think we started working on that. I think the first commits landed in like 2019 on that. And then beginning of 2019. And then in 2021, we actually, released that technology and, where people could use it on Stackblitz. And then this past week, we actually just opened up the public API. So now other people can take WebContainer and build it into their stuff. Okay, anyways, so that's like the full technology story of how this stuff came to be.
That's perfect. And it's a great segue. We're going to pause for a sponsor break, and then we're going to come back and chat all about WebContainers.
Heck yeah.
How in the world could I forget about this?
There's no need to freak out. We have Storyblok.
Robert, you're right.
But we still need a backup.
Okay, how much time do we have left until the launch?
24 hours.
Okay, let's go.
We are ready to publish.
So let's get this baby online.
Let's get this baby online. That's Stackblitz needs that new logo. Slogan.
That's a good ad, actually.
Storyblok is pretty crazy at how their marketing team is. They're just so good, especially like at conferences. They do like this whole game setup where you play Tetris, and the person that gets the most wins like big prizes at the end of the conference. And so they always attract people coming over, and their ads are so great. They're so good. But I wanted to ask, you were talking a lot about Webpack in the beginning of StackBlitz and how that got in. And now I know that StackBlitz is a huge supporter of the Vite ecosystem, and you have a few Vite maintainers, at least one working for StackBlitz. But are you using Vite now? How is that playing into web containers and that story now?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yeah, so we ourselves are actually like we've been migrating our stuff over to Vite. And I think we're either done or we're very close or something like that. But yeah, that one was interesting because like, you know, when we originally put Web Container online, because we got involved with Vite, I think it was in the fall of 2021, and we launched Web Container in May of 2020. So it was only a couple months after we had launched Web Container. And one of the things with StackBlitz, and like we're kind of doing stuff that until recently really no one else was even trying to do, like running this stuff in the browser. It's pretty important. Like a web container on its own is very useless. What makes it magical is the stuff you install into it, right? Like the tool chains you install. It's I mean, like an operating system with nothing is cool to like ls, and then you're like, what do I do, right? And so it's really strategically important for us as a company that we actually have excellent relationships with open source projects, and that we're really working with them and making sure that their stuff runs great inside StackBlitz. And I think also one of the big concerns for us when we launched Web Container, because at that time, Vite was very, I mean, almost no one was even talking about it when Web Container first went online. And so as we spent years building the technology, one of the biggest concerns we had was like, even if we make it incredibly fast to install everything or whatever have you, if your tool chain is really slow, it's going to kill the experience. Because like people, if you look at these like things like Figma or Google Docs, there's this expectation when you open a browser tab for these things that it's going to like boot up instant. You know what I mean? And what's outside of our control, right, to a large degree, is how the NPM ecosystem is designing their bundlers and their tool chains, whatever have you. And kind of at that time, in the previous era, the way in which these module graphs were being crunched and et cetera, things just were kind of grinding to a halt. And that's really where, I mean, and this is why Vite really came into the picture, is because they took a very different approach to how you would actually build a bundler that would allow for very fast boot up times and et cetera. And so what ended up happening was we launched Web Container. We were a lot of people were starting to use StackBlitz, et cetera, and we kept hearing from folks in the Vite community, like Evan Ewes would tweet occasionally at us and be like, "Hey, have you guys enabled like ESBuild to run in this stuff?" And we're like, "Oh, not yet." And then once we enabled that, a whole bunch of these people from the Vite ecosystem started coming in, and so one night I was just I don't know. I guess I was just curious. I was like, what is this Vite thing? Because it kind of keeps coming across, our Twitter or my emails or whatever. And I was reading on it, just through the docs at that time, and I was like, oh wow, holy crap! Like this, I think that this makes a lot of sense how they designed it, and it just struck me as just a really pragmatic, obvious path forward for the ecosystem to move towards. I mean, in particular. The thing for me personally that sold it was the fact that their plugin API surface was based on rollup was huge. Because like when you're building a new build tool, right? So to go on a tangent on this, but it was like, I think this is like probably one of the most important decisions that team made. Is like when you're building a new tool, you have to crack the chicken and egg problem, right? Of like getting people to adopt it, et cetera. And that's really hard, especially if you're like a bundler, because there's so many bundling options, there's so many tools out there. And so getting people to write plugins for every which thing, just takes forever. And so your stuff's got to be really good for that, like for everyone to just be like, we're going to rewrite everything. We're going to throw everything else out, and so it just doesn't happen often unless there's a tectonic shift that causes it. And whereas in Vite's case, by adopting the rollup API surface, rollup had been out for like 5 or 6 years or something. There was already a plugin for like almost anything, right? And so they were able to like just immediately off the bat have a community they could tap into in a plugin ecosystem. They just made stuff work. And and for the computationally expensive stuff, they're using native tooling like ESBuild under the hood, but that's entirely abstracted away from the developer. So anyway, so at that point I was like, I'm convinced this thing is going to just take over how people are building web apps, because it's it's designed to interoperate with how everything's been working already. It's also designed to be ridiculously fast and very secure. And those are all the things that we care about too. And so we ended up being the biggest backer of Veep back, I think, in November of 21, and then Matthias, as part of the process of us getting involved with Veep, we spent a lot of time talking, and so he came on board, and he's been working with us full time, and he's that guy's a gem. I love working with Matthias.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we're big fans of V, and since then, I mean, I think we became involved with V. I think they're doing like 100 or 200,000 downloads a week. And I think they're doing, I think they're about to cross 4 million.
It is pretty insane, like how the V ecosystem has just taken over the world.
Yeah.
And it reminded me a little bit of how Quick and Mishko have taken pieces of the ecosystem. He's like, I didn't want to rebuild everything. I wanted to use tooling that already existed. So I used JSX and he used things. It reminded me a little bit of that story with Mishko and how he's doing that for Quick also.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's really smart, because I think everyone's like, I think that there's a default instinct when you're going to build something new. It's like, we want it to be all new. We want it to be like ours, and, it's just like the best, and it's like the best thing ever. And, but I think the reality is often the pragmatic, it's more pragmatic you are about, hey, how do we make this easier to adopt? Right. And like, that's a huge part of developer experience, I think, right. Is like, how much work am I going to have to do, and how painful is it going to be to kind of go from what I'm doing today over to this thing? And I think the V team's done a really good job of designing that tool in a way where it's appearing everywhere, not even in bundlers, for like running test suites with V-Test, and just it's kind of showing up in a lot of places. And so we did VConf last year, which was like a lot of fun. I mean, it's like super cool, just like all the people in this community, and I think this one this year is going to be even more interesting. I mean, it's just things are only the interestingness is multiplying as is along with Veep's growth, I think, right? So
I love that community because they don't feel like they exclude people. It's like there's so many people using Veep that they bring in people from all the different ecosystems, and they all come together in this one big community, and I love it.
Totally. It's cool too that it's not owned by like it's not like some open source is like it's like a company that will like make this thing, and like, which is not bad, like things like Kubernetes, right, and like React kind of popped out of Google and Meta, kind of respectively, and and that's like cool. It's Evan and the team over there have just done a really good job being independent. I think it's kind of their superpower, because they just are not limited to thinking about shareholders and profits and things like that. If they build great stuff, people will want to contribute and support it. And it's one of the few big success stories, I think, in the open source world.
Agreed.
Let's
dive in deeper to web containers. I'll bring up the web container site, so WebContainers.io.
Let's do it. Oh yeah, whew, that is a good looking site.
Yes.
I notice your perfect pick might be sneaking out already. So
no, Devin, who's on our team, he was the one who he does all of our design and brand design, and he's got a good taste for this sort of thing. But it's cool, because I mean, what you're seeing right on the right over here, we were like, there's a lot of conversations like, this was actually really hard to market. Like, how do you market something like this? It's like a dev environment, like, even the tagline, we're like, is this the right one? Open to feedback, by the way, if you all hate it. We were like, what would be a great demo? And so then what you see on the right is kind of what we did there, where, it's like, hey, we want to show you that, just by loading this page, there's this operating system running, and you can actually run commands in it. And it ran PMPM after you loaded the page and everything, so So
it's actually running live in this page.
Oh yeah, so if you click on that terminal over there, you can like start typing some dependencies into it. And,
that is ridiculous.
Oh wow, I had no idea.
If you type in the file up top, that's actually saving to the file systems. You can type node index.js. If you type things in the file.
I'm gonna ask like a really dumb question, because containers and Kubernetes and like Vim and all this stuff is like crazy to me. But what's the difference between a virtual machine and a web container?
Yeah, so a virtual machine, because it's actually like, even if you even pull web containers in the mix, there's like virtual machine, there's containers, there's container images. And so there's like, even in just that world, there's like lots of differences between these things. And so I think I'll kind of group all of those in one bucket and the web containers in another. So when you look at like traditional VMs or like Docker containers and that sort of thing, they're encapsulating, stuff that can run on like x86 or ARM-based architectures. They're like, they're running like basically on the metal of your machine. I'm doing a really bad job explaining this, but effectively you have to give those things like native access. If you're going to run a container, you have to like install something locally and run it there, etc. Right?
Oh, gotcha.
What a web container allows you to do is you don't have to install anything. So it's actually using like your browser's built-in WebAssembly and JavaScript engine to actually execute this like operating system within your browser tab, right? And so what's super cool about that is like, one, there's no download step, which is nice. Not having to install things is a pretty cool experience. Two is that it's really secure. So like if you actually go and write in that file up there and you say, go download the worst exploit in the npm ecosystem and then execute it, it's not going to do anything to your computer. It's actually, because it's entirely, the execution is sandboxed to this browser tab that we're looking at, right? And not even that, so it couldn't even punch out to the main thread of WebContainers.io here. It'd actually be constrained to like this iframe where it's actually executed because it's cross origin. And that's it. So browsers are like some of the most secure environments to run untrusted code anywhere, because like Google and the other browser vendors have spent decades making the JavaScript and WebAssembly engines of these things the fastest, most secure place to run untrusted code. So being able to run an operating system and dev environments in there, one is great because it gives you the best performance, and two, it gives you the best security guarantees you can effectively get. So anyway, so that's like more than you asked for, I think.
No, that's a great explanation. And this isn't running, like we're not hitting somebody else's server with this stuff on it. This is actually running in that browser tab.
Correct. Yep, exactly.
I think I crashed the tab.
Did you write an infinite loop?
Yeah, I wanted to see what happened. Oh, I might have crashed. They must share
like all of.
Oops.
Yeah, it might be sharing a. It might actually be. So if you close that tab entirely and then just open a fresh one, I think it should nuke it at that point, I believe. There you go. Yeah.
Yay!
Oops. Sorry, I really wanted to test it out. So let's talk a minute about so we talked a lot about Stacklets, obviously, because you're head of Stacklets. I'm kind of curious, when you go to getting started, so when we talk about Stacklets first, like code flow and things like that, what is the difference in people's minds? Like, there's multiple ways to use web containers. Can we break down like why you would want to use them in the different fashions versus just embedding like all of Stacklets into something?
Yeah, totally. And so, and we at Stacklets have a couple of different editor experiences that we use web containers on. And so, like on this page, you can see there's like open Stacklets and then open in CodeFlow, and the difference between those are, and there's probably going to be some merging in the future. We're kind of figuring out how exactly we want to do it, but the idea between these two things you're looking at is this is kind of our CodePen++ editor, what we're seeing right here. That's like the open in Stacklets button. And this is like, I'm not trying to like, connect this thing to a Git repo. I want to like run it without having to download something. But I may want to make changes and save this link and send the link to someone. That's kind of the use case of this. The CodeFlow one, this is running full VS Code with all of your favorite VS Code extensions. Like this is VS Code running the desktop version of VS Code on top of web container in your browser here. And you can actually, do your full development. You can commit back to Git. You can fork this thing, etc. So those are kind of the two different experiences that we provide out of the box for this thing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, when you're running local things like this, I assume it's out on a port somewhere, right? So you can hit like this instead of localhost, it's somewhere else, or no?
Yes, exactly. And so this is what's cool about this. This is actually, if you were to disconnect your internet, you would get disconnected from the podcast. So don't do that. But if you were to disconnect your internet, you can try it after the podcast. That URL will keep working, actually.
Nice.
Because it's actually running inside of your browser over the service worker API. So we've actually mapped a TCP networking stack to the browser service worker API. So you can actually run full HTTP and WebSocket servers entirely in your browser.
That's incredible.
Mapped to this running, web container effectively. And so that was we were the first folks that really had ever done anything kind of quite like this. And there's been some other folks that have actually kind of started doing things actually similar-ish to Web Container and that sort of thing. The past like week or two actually. But even now it's it's cool stuff because you can actually it's like your local dev environment, but in a browser tab that you can review a pull request, throw it out instead of having to context switch locally.
Yeah.
You just have an instant environment you can spin up or do the review, throw the browser tab out. It boots up instantly, fast and
That's a
local.
fantastic example. I feel like I'm doing that all the time where like I'm cloning it to a separate like area so I can keep working and do all those PR reviews. But it would be cool to just add a button out there. And maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like GitHub's trying to do that. What's their, I can never remember.
Code Spaces.
They're trying to do the same with that, but that's another revenue stream for them, but not the same as Web Containers, right? That's not.
Yeah, so they're doing it the traditional way, which is I think like them and Gitpod and Code Sandbox's primary offering is they also do it this way where they are actually using servers. Like when you click to like review a pull request or something, it's actually spinning up a cloud VM out there, in the cloud, whichever cloud, and installs all your dependencies, boots it up, etc. And kind of has all the downsides I mentioned earlier, which is it's slower, there's latency, etc. In some cases, it's there are benefits which we could talk about, but I think especially in web development, it tends to not really make a lot of sense from a user experience perspective or a cost perspective. And so I think it seems like there's been, especially like Microsoft is pushing code spaces a good amount. I think it seems like folks are using them to a certain degree, but it can take a while for those things to boot up, and I think, again, kind of coming back to what we felt was really important is I don't want to use this thing. Like I have a local environment and just about every developer does. If this thing takes, minutes to spin up in the cloud or whatever, I'm not going to want to use it on every pull request. Right. Yeah.
How that works with like a private GitHub repo and like trying to do those pull requests into StackBlitz, what's the permission? How do you handle that?
Yeah. So it's actually pretty cool because it's better. It's actually a lot better than how it works on like local machines. Mm-hmm. You just OAuth. You actually just you log in with StackBlitz and you say and for if it's like an organization, your organization has to approve StackBlitz to be able to open your repos or whatever. But what's really cool about that is that there's not these like lingering SSH keys hanging around on your blocks. When you look at like code spaces or any of the other server things, they've got SSH keys that they're keeping locally on that box, and that's a problem from a security perspective. Like if you look at the supply chain attacks that have been happening, the way that in a nutshell, the way it kind of works is they get you to accidentally install something you shouldn't have as part of your npm install process, whether it be a subdependency or otherwise. A post-install script will execute, grab all of your SSH keys and npm keys, whatever, upload that to a server, and then they just start doing things on your behalf, right? And so in Web Container, there are no SSH keys. It's all done using expiring OAuth tokens that are never actually exposed to the Web Container instance, through cross-origin isolation. And so that's it. That's huge because even if they could access the tokens being used, they're going to be useless in like 10 minutes. And so you got a very short window to actually if you could even break the cross-origin security aspect. So for that reason, we have a lot of enterprise companies that are looking to use our stuff or using our stuff because it gives you like really, really good guarantees on this sort of thing.
That makes a lot of sense. And for like my company's setup is just so insane with like having the containers and things or doing it all locally. And it's a complicated setup to onboard people. So having like something that you could just upload would be so nice.
Totally. And that's one of the big things. Any company that's has to have a good security posture, that's typically a huge issue usually like security and productivity are don't usually come in the same box because the more security you have, that usually means more doors, more locks, more things, punch codes you have to put in to do things, right? So it's productivity kind of takes a hit. Typically with productivity tools, here's a link to this thing, it's just easy, but that also means that it's less secure typically because it's easier to gain access to something you shouldn't. What's kind of cool with what we've done, but is actually not even really what we've done is browsers have had to optimize for both, and optimizing for both takes a very long time. And browsers have been at this for 3 decades now. And so by being able to build on top of what Google and Mozilla and Apple and whatever are doing is just huge, because you, at an enterprise organization, they can adopt this thing. And so they often will say, well, where are you running these VMs? We're like, we're not running them any. We're not selling you a new runtime. You've already approved Chrome, right? As a runtime you trust. This runs in that, and it's really compelling, because it allows you to do fast employee onboarding. It gives you the security you need, et cetera. So exactly what you're describing is like totally what this is valuable.
That seems like it's really easy to sell. Let's talk about the pricing then. Like, what does that pricing model look like?
You got to talk to sales. Oh no, no, it kind of varies, right? So we've got a new SaaS offering that's actually about to come out, where you can use it with like publicly hosted, GitHub, even like GitHub Enterprise, GitLab, that sort of thing. And for that, we again, it's like, I think from like the roots of like where we built the company from, like Albert and I, from when we were like 12, 13, we're doing a very generous sort of like free tier, where it's like, in fact, you can use this stuff entirely for free for the most part. If you're in a team of up to like 5 or something like that, right? And then I think at that point, it's I think the pricing jump is going to be something like the tens of dollars per month, right? And if you're in an enterprise company, you have to install this thing on-prem and all that sort of stuff. It kind of depends, because there's like support contracts that come into play, and so that's like higher than what our SaaS stuff will be. But generally speaking, it's like it's really affordable. It's like you can measure it in cups of coffee, like what you're paying for this thing. And the benefit you get is like ridiculous. I'm biased here, obviously, but some of these, our customers have done value models on these things, and it's just like ridiculous. Like, if we spend $500,000 to get our entire multi-thousand person dev org on this thing, we're going to save a couple $1 million a year conservatively, by buying this stuff. So anyway, it's cool. It's taken us half a decade to get this stuff to the point where it can actually really work this well. But it's cool to build something that actually provides a lot of value and makes development fast and
I think it is. I think that's pretty incredible too, that it came from that beginning story for you and wanting to have that dev environment. I remember like learning to code. It's not just learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's learning NPM and Git and all the things, and getting that local dev environment set up is just so much on a beginner. So it's nice to have these things, and it's an incredible story.
So I want to talk about a tweet I threw out there, kind of at the Code Sandbox people and yourself. They have a new product. Forgetting the name already. What is it called?
I think it's called Nodebox.
Sandpack
and Nodebox. Yeah. So it's like,
you compared it. The difference between an electric SUV versus an e-board. So
I'll put an asterisk. So by the way, so that seems really, it seems rude. So I just want to throw it out there. Actually, I commuted on an e-board for a year in San Francisco. So like that, it's actually a huge compliment.
Here's a picture of him. I think that's the picture.
Yeah. So I didn't say it. Like, that's me. Like, that's actually me, and I hope that adding the image there's a story here though, which is, it would take, I lived on the opposite side. Albert and I we thought we were going to hire, our team was going to be in San Francisco based. We ended up hiring everyone remote. We had not hired anyone in California, 4 years later. So we had gotten an office though, to prepare for this, that was in the downtown of San Francisco. And we lived out on the other side. And so it was like, 4 miles in heavy traffic every morning. And so it took like 45 minutes on the bus, or Uber or whatever. And I kind of got sick of it. And so I was like, what would be the fastest way to do this? And so I might have watched Tron or something around that. So I was like, do I want to buy a motorcycle? Not really. That seems, maybe not a good idea. Electric bike, yeah, maybe. And, I had snowboarded growing up or whatever. So I got one of these things. And I'm in that photo, I'm wearing a lot of gear, because the first day I got it, like kind of a classic guy, I guess, I was like, how fast can this thing go? And first time on the thing, I think it was like, I probably hit like 20, 25 miles an hour and just went straight off the thing. But so then I was like padded up from there on out. And,
that's really good. This is my one wheel story.
That's what I was going to say. This reminds me of the one wheel fad that everybody's been on. Those things look dangerous.
I couldn't walk
Yeah.
for a week and a half after I crashed that thing. So
Wow. Yeah, no, and that's the thing is it's, you can kind of learn to trust, especially the one wheels, I think, because they're especially easy to kind of balance on compared to the longboard sort of things. But what I'll say about it is, it took a 45-minute commute. And with that thing, I was door to door in less than 20 minutes because I would just be like just cutting through the traffic because I could just like be weaving,
and
insert Tron music playing where it's just kind of like,
at least a little exercise.
Sounds fun. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was my analogy, really. And I think that, and maybe a more charitable analogy that I think a lot of people could probably relate to would be something like one of these like really powerful e-bikes, right? Where it's something that you can actually use to like commute every single day, right? But it's not something that it's not something you're gonna take your family to the movies in, right? I guess if that makes sense. And I think that the Code Sandbox folks, when they launched it, they've been very clear that they're very much targeting like running examples and documentation and that sort of thing versus doing like lots of, kind of the sort of use cases that we were just kind of showing here, right? And so that was kind of the main point I was trying to illustrate. And, when I was saying that, but it probably only made sense to me as someone who's using keyboards.
No, I thought it was fine. I think there's some good discussion after that too. So it was just a funny analogy. The part I think that was with the Code Sandbox side of things is that their cross browser is WebContainers cross browser, or is it only Chrome?
Yeah, so we've been running in Firefox for over a year as well, and so our approach. There's a short answer to what you're saying, so that kind of when we first launched WebContainer in 2021, the big problem, like everything in StackBits has been built on things that are web standards. Like there's nothing that's like Chrome specific that like would make it be Chrome only. It's just that Chrome was the only people that have shipped the things that have been standardized effectively, right?
Yeah.
It's like WebAssembly threads, and there's a handful of other things, and for the most part, and and so I think that the strategy we've kind of taken is like the web. We want to help the web. All browsers get to a point where they've got these modern things. We think it's really important. So we actually have a blog post. I can share the link here. And we became a part of a group called the Bytecode Alliance, which is focusing on kind of the future of like WebAssembly and things related like the WebAssembly system interface, et cetera. And I think the big thing that we're providing, and so in the Bytecode Alliance is a consortium of like companies like us, but also all of the major browser vendor companies like Google, Mozilla, et cetera. And so we've been able to work with those companies a lot, actually, on getting WebContainers to run there. We've got great relationships with those folks. And that's actually how we got Firefox working in such short order. Was some great folks like Bobby Holly and a handful of folks on the Firefox side made that happen. Nice. And so kind of our approach has been we want to actually help. We want to help push the web forward kind of on all platforms. And we're, to a large degree, we're willing to be patient and just kind of and help build public support to make these things happen. Because there's StackBits may be like one of the, today one of the most sophisticated things that runs in a browser engine. But 5-10 years from now, I think that, what are the possibilities, right, that get unlocked when you actually really, like, if you look at in the 70s, like what NASA did to actually get people on the moon, the technologies that were invented from that changed everything for 50 years later, right? And so I think that's when I think it's worthwhile to really kind of go along and say, hey, we need to like apply pressure here and be as helpful as we can and put as many eyeballs on this and kind of rally our community to like be asking browser vendors to make this happen. Because, and so the short answer to your question is, oh yeah, it runs in Safari now, actually. Like, so the Safari team, I think the latest beta, they've added effectively all of the things we've ever asked for. and it's, I think
peer pressure at that point.
Totally. And part of it is maybe related to potential antitrust stuff. And so they're trying to catch up on browser features or whatever have you. But when they're kind of going, I got to imagine, as they're going through the short list, they're going, what are the things that web developers have been asking for? And the stuff that we've been, web developers are a small audience, but StackBits has a lot of web developers that use it. And so we've been able to have folks advocating with us to make these things land. And so in the new Safari beta, you can actually like run web containers. Not everything's working or whatever at this point, but it's like you can run, I think like SvelteKit runs in it, and Vite runs, and a handful of other things. And so over the next week or two, it's like that's going to be, I think, we'll have some announcements as far as like, hey, this is kind of ready to rock and roll. Anyway, so that's been our approach, is to work with the browser vendors to adopt things that have been standardized and make sure it works well on their stuff. Yeah.
It's really good segue on the Svelte tutorial piece of things. So
I was going to say the same thing.
Something else I wanted to show off. The reason that I initially started researching this is because we ultimately at CodingCat, we want to get to the point where we're teaching in the browser fully. Like, you don't have to do anything. Maybe you hit the version of a Git repo and it loads automatically to do your tests and things like that. So if I refresh the new learn.svelte.dev, you'll see in the bottom right here how it's starting up all the web container pieces and parts. And then as you kind of work through this, there's different things like you click solve just to see what actually occurs. And I think it's brilliant. We'll probably add a video on top of this, so we're teaching as we go along, but to be able to execute practically anything, maybe not stuff that needs Docker or anything like that, but from a web development standpoint, I love it. So I props to, I think Rich actually did a lot of this, but
Simon and Rich and I think a few of the team, but I think you work closely with the StackBlitz team, right? They worked closely together with them.
Yeah, totally. And they deserve a shout out because back I think it was probably about a year ago, we started seriously. We had the idea to do the public API of WebContainer, and that was it maybe kind of seems obvious that we would make such a thing now, but back a year ago, it was still from our perspective, it was is this even ready to go out there? And from a business perspective, does it make sense? Does anyone want it? We wouldn't want to in a situation where, because when you look at companies that have built deep technologies, deep technology plays, things that take years to develop and are kind of a huge bet, and it's either it works or it doesn't. It's a lot of times the immediate incentive is to keep it all proprietary for the company, and it's only for their products, and et cetera. And so if you kind of look at mobile operating systems, Apple continues to be iOS only will run on Apple. Right. Mm-hmm. And same thing with self-driving cars, that technology, every company is kind of building their own thing right now. It's very proprietary. And, if you look at the mobile landscape, Google was very savvy to release an operating system that could actually just be licensed and people could contribute to and make better and make cohesive. Right. And, as a kind of by analogy in the self-driving car space, there hasn't been that yet. Right. And you've seen there's escalation happening across all these different companies where, kind of in the extreme case, you got Uber, where Uber put one of their senior guys, they're very far behind. I think it's before they were IPOing. So maybe, there's incentive to kind of show results, but they actually put a guy into Google's hiring funnel and the guy copy pasted code, from Google over to Uber. Right. And so you've got these, which I think is, any reasonable person would say, okay, there's some moral wrongdoing and maybe probably criminality in doing such a thing. Right. And so you kind of look at that and you're well, what if a company, maybe there's a good reason for it, but it's certainly worth exploring. What if a company said, hey, we actually are going to we want to work with everyone. We want to incentivize everyone to work with us and actually build this technology out and make it better. And so that was a year ago when we're looking at the Web Container API, we're it seems very, it's very uncomfortable, this idea, but it actually really, it seems very logical that we actually we want people to be able to use this. So because there's so many types of things that people could build that really wouldn't be possible without this. And we don't want to incentivize people to not want to work with us. And so when we actually set out to build the API, I was talking with Rich Harris, and whenever you're kind of building something like this, especially something like this where it's an API that's very technical, right? It's not. It's kind of a lower level thing, and you want to have some people that have built really cool things with it that really are tangible examples of, wow, this is possible. And Rich is he's someone I respect a lot, and he can really, he's got that kind of full stack sort of vision where he can kind of look at the technical details and then all the way out to the end experience, make something that just kind of blows your mind. And so we were talking about the API, and so our team put together the first prototype of the thing, and he built the first prototype of the Svelte Learn REPL, and I think it was last May. He announced it at a conference, and there's a lot of excitement around it. And it made people go, wow. And so his teams provide us with a ton of feedback, just super helpful. But so they deserve a shout out for all, because it was really key. It was really key for us for, not only just the API that we ended up landing on was really driven by their feedback, but also like the validation, like, hey, are there really like use cases people would find this interesting for outside of just like how StackBlitz is using it? Like seeing this, it was like, this is so obvious. This is going to change everything for how developers are like learning or prototyping, or, even there's some interesting AI related ones that are kind of popping out now of like, you tell ChatGPT to like write you a Vite SSR app, but it doesn't just show the code, it actually executes it in a web container on the page, right? Like stuff like that, where it's just, kind of mind blowing. But anyway, so that's how it came to be.
That's really cool.
What you were saying about sharing code and like making those things, what we can learn from open source too is it spurs innovation. Like that's like, we see new JavaScript frameworks and they're all kind of copying a little bit from each other, but they all have their own little unique thing that they come up with because there's like different ways that they innovate on all of that. And I agree with you. I think that that's the best way to go, is just sharing and allowing everyone to use that.
Totally. And I think too, it kind of forces us to like, I think it forces you to keep yourself honest in the sense of, if we think that, we're going to build the best products, right. And be able to build the best experiences, then it shouldn't be a problem, right? Like I think everyone having access in the same way Google does with Android, where Google makes kind of their flagship devices, right? And they're like, we're going to, we think we can make the best Android phones, but so does Samsung, and Samsung will ship and sometimes Google contracts Samsung to make Google's flagship phone. This marketing is the Google thing, right? And so I think it's like, that's kind of the future that we think is the most exciting and interesting one for this sort of stuff, because we're a small company, we're just not going to be able to build all the things out there. And I mean, nor would we want to, because it's like, seeing the stuff like that Rich and his team and all these other folks have been building already, it's just been really cool. So it's one of those cool things where it's like kind of classic innovator's dilemma, right? And I think it's a good sign of like the health of an organization when they're embracing the future before the future's there. You know what I mean?
I could even see your past with Thinkster coming back into play with this. Like maybe you come up with some like tutorial thing in the future that StackBlitz like does.
We kicked around this idea of having a tutorial mode on StackBlitz for a long time. And I, now there's some tutorial sites that since we launched last week are coming in and they're doing this, which is so cool. Cause it's like, seeing like Egghead.io has been with their total TypeScript course, and that sort of thing has actually been doing.
Oh, they're doing it.
Yeah. So if you go through the Matt's course over there, it's at the end of every video, there's an interactive StackBlitz where you actually are doing an interactive lesson before you move on to the next step. And so we're just trying to scratch the surface of this, like I think it's behind. I think it's like, it's completely fresh ground. Like there's, everyone's kind of just getting started with how you can build these things. Right. I think the benefit of StackBlitz's approach here is StackBlitz has just been building this stuff for 4 years now. So the level of like, compatibility and speed and performance and et cetera, it's just, I think that it's very hard to find anything else, I guess, that's kind of got that level, simply because we've just had, this is the only technology we build, and we've been building it for a long time. So you're going to be hard pressed to find things that like don't run well in web container, but we're excited about it. We're excited to see the reception to the API and whatnot.
Yeah, it's really amazing to become the standard for everyone else to catch to. So that's really awesome. We're going to transition over to our perfect picks now. And just as Eric takes a drink, I'm going to let him go first, because I don't understand what this is. What is this Warzone thing?
I don't know about the ad at the top. That's a weird ad.
I'm blocking all ads.
These game sites, I swear, you can't get a good, like they all have ads, so many ads.
If there's a better URL, we'll find one later.
I don't know. I've heard the loadout.com's on par with like, the New York Times or the Washington Post for editorial, integrity. So I don't know. I'm kidding. I have no idea.
They've got to get paid somehow, right?
Yeah, I've never even seen this site before today. I'm totally joking. Yeah, this is a fun mode. I don't know. Like Albert and I actually will play video. Yesterday we actually played this together, so that's why I was kind of talking. Right? And it's a lot of fun. Call of Duty War. It's like a battle royale. It's a great mode. They just brought it back in the second version, so it's good stuff.
Kind of like Fortnite style.
Yes, yeah, it's exactly Fortnite style. It's basically think Fortnite plus Call of Duty. Yeah, it's nice. So like first person shooter. You're not like swinging a cartoonish hammer around or something like that. It's like, so I think that's pretty cool. But
I couldn't look at that any longer, so I brought up your second pick.
Okay, cool. And the other one's Clack. So this is actually it was made by Nate Moore over at Astro, I think. This is super cool. It's basically a utility library for building delicious looking prompts in a CLI. I didn't you don't really realize how hard it is to make CLIs like look good and feel good, and until you actually have to do it, and you're like, wow, this is the primitives that are out there,
Yeah.
So a lot of people were really stoked about this product. I mean, as when I saw them originally tweeted, I gave them, I retweeted because like, that is cool, that looks great. I think they're actually the stuff they've been building for the Astro CLI, which is also gorgeous. I think
it is beautiful.
Yeah, it's if not the best, one of the best, I think.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the stuff that they had built there, I don't know if it was him or other people, but this is kind of the using it as a service in your things, basically. So
would this kind of be like a framework to build CLIs?
Yeah, I think effectively. Also, cool thing is that terminal right there is a web container. So if you hit Command C or whatever, you'll actually you can ls, and that's the web container API. So this is like an ad. Not even a week later or whatever. It's popping up
and this is going to go straight into my pick because I see a lot of PNPM like everywhere, and I love it.
Heck yeah! So my picks are done. So that's it for me.
Good picks. Bad decision on URLs, but good picks. From me.
So my first pick is PNPM workspaces, but specifically with NX and Jury, who we've had. Yuri.
I always say Yuri. I hope that's
Yuri,
right.
Who we've had on before. Love him. He does a great job explaining how to get set up with a PNPM monorepo workspace and then add in NX. And I did this at work recently. So I'm doing design systems. So we have a CSS style package already, and then I'm making one for Storybook and components. And so each of those is now in its own packages directory. And then I installed NX, and you can run the graph command, and it will open up in the browser and show you like how all of your packages are like linked together and which ones are using which other packages. And it's really cool.
The fantastic part is when you update just a single piece, that graph understands what it has to build. So it really reduces that build time down too. So it's fun. Cool.
It's really good. Okay, you did see so we announced a Svelte hackathon, and if you scroll down a little bit, you might see someone on there sponsored by. Yeah. So, but we're doing a hackathon in the Svelte community, just trying to get some interest into the community and get some projects out there to show people now that SvelteKit is 1.0. What?
I was looking at it, I'm like, that's not right. And then I'm like, oh, they're clever. I got
it. So it started February 17th and it ends April 17th.
I'm like, that was going to throw an error. Sorry.
You should have a red underline, on that. Where when you hover it, it says, this is intentional.
Yes.
You're like, we get it.
I got an error like that the other day. It says, this is an intentional error. I'm like, what does that mean?
This is an assertion. Sorry. Nice. I might have to sign up for this.
Absolutely. I'm not able to, so you should. I'm an ambassador, so I'm not allowed to sign up for it. We're excluding ourselves from the
StackBlitz probably can't either. Sorry, folks. I'm going to try to share this other tool. So this tool is called Sloth, and I've got it's in a different
screen. You got to
screen.
share your other screen.
Yeah. Okay. I hope this works. So Sloth, it's a native Mac app that shows all of your open files and directories. And for me, what the biggest thing is sockets that are open. So I'm always like LSOF and like doing all that, trying to search command line wise. This is really nice to be able to bring up all of the like the different sockets that are actually open. And I've found things in here that are creepy as heck, to put it differently, and dug into some of it. So I would highly suggest this, especially if you're trying to like understand why is Google Chrome,
So
executing so
is
much.
this like the
so many
Windows
things.
inspector for Mac?
I feel like it's really close to that. So Mac has an activities
Okay.
activity monitor like this. This does not do everything that that Sloth does. So
Gotcha.
it's pretty wild. I just picked it up the other day because I've been running Discord. I've been running Docker a ton, and because my Mac allows like 128 gigs of RAM, all of a sudden like something gets slow, it really freaks me out, and it's usually that. And so I start to hunt it down and see what ports are open and all that fun stuff. So, anyways, Sloth, check it out if you're on Mac. Thanks so much, Eric. I really appreciate it, especially the speediness of hopping on the thread on Twitter and jumping on the podcast right away just to talk about web containers. Really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
It's great to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Been a huge fan of StackBlitz for many years, so keep up the great work. I hope all the funding and fun stuff from the CEO side stays valid and good.
Totally. Absolutely.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.
Later.
Sounds good.